Did you know that in the September to December quarter last year, over $600 million of debt was repaid by farmers, and those leading the pack were dairy farmers. So raise a glass of milk to that. But the world just got weird, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. So how do you control the uncontrollable? That's why I decided to get a smart cookie like Scott Wishart onto Sarah's Country for you to answer all your questions when it comes to how to navigate planning for the financial year ahead. Scott Wishart is the Managing Director for NZAB and joins us now. First, Scott, how do you prepare for the worst when new worst just keeps unfolding every week?
Yeah, evening, Sarah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think it just reinforces more so than ever that there's no such thing as status quo.
Yeah.
And if you're planning for status quo, it's either going to be better or worse in most cases. So, yeah, interesting times.
So you're sending out a lot of advice to not only your clients, but you're really passionate about getting the advice out to wider people in the industry because you're being very close to the ear of the banks in your previous experience. Can you just update our audience on your experience and who is NZAB?
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, look, the theme tonight with Tangarai and with Simon has really been about getting experts around to manage or to help you manage and control events that are really uncertain. And I guess that's where our business started. So NZAB works with farmers to help them take control of their finance and their strategy, and then work with their banks to make sure that they get the support and the terms and conditions that they deserve. It's not an easy process, but it is one where if you take the right level of control and I suppose own your risk, then you can get some really good results.
So as we were talking on my podcast probably a month or so ago, we were dealing with an environment where banks were trying to sort of heave-ho over the edge of the boat as much rural lending as they could to try and, well, not stay afloat, but lessen their risk. How on earth do we get banks to see that rural risk is worth working with now with this change with COVID-19?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the first point I'd make is that reducing risk doesn't necessarily mean reducing debt. It's about ensuring that where the debt sits is with those farmers and business owners that actually know what they've taken on and how to manage it. And so it's really, really important. And, the message from that previous podcast to now hasn't changed a whole lot. It's about getting in front of these issues and understanding how your business deals with certain shocks to its performance and how a bank might interpret that. I guess the opportunity that we have right now is that a lot of the immediate impacts are on businesses outside the farm gate. And I suppose to a rugby analogy that I use a lot, it's what you do when you don't have the ball. And I suppose for a lot of farmers, that's us now. So we have an opportunity to get our businesses ready, understand what the next 12 or 18 months looks like, come up with a really clear plan, get really clear about what could affect that plan and how we might deal with it, and then get it in front of those banks now before they're asking for it so that they can process them through now, and hopefully we can get on with the business of farming for the next 12 or 18 months.
The global financial crisis really changed things for, in particular, dairy farmers and their loan facilities, renewing them more regularly, and a lot of those will be probably coming up for renewal. It's more not whether they will support you with any forms of extension, it's more whether they will re-sign you full stop.
Yeah, look, it's, prior to GFC, most farmers probably had a 15-year loan. When the liquidity costs really became something that we all found out about, I suppose there was a tendency to shorten up loan expiry dates because that made the cost of finance a little bit cheaper. I guess we see a certain set of circumstances right now with COVID-19 where capital flowing into the banks in New Zealand could get more expensive, a little bit like GFC times, but hopefully not the same restriction on capital, although it's far too soon to tell. So I think there's a real opportunity now for farmers to be looking at any of those loan facilities that are either rolling off a fixed rate or maturing over the next 12 months and look at how we can get approvals and structures in place for those now, before those liquidity costs start to creep in, because there are mechanisms to control that for farmers who have the support around them to understand the options.
What about cash flow forecasting going into the financial year 2020 ahead, and how to be able to stress test your business to see sort of how you put those things in place?
Yeah, absolutely critical. And so I suppose, it's easy to do a budget, and most of us in the farming industry, we are optimistic about the year ahead in most cases. But I think it's about understanding what are the things that could impact our performance, and what will those impacts look like when you put them on paper. And I suppose making sure that the working capital you've got, or the banking facilities that you've got, don't just see you through best case, but see you through worst case. Because there's no doubt that the way banking systems and regulators look at deals these days, the more often you go back to the bank and ask for a change in your finance, the more that does tend to count against you in the long run. And so I suppose it's about being prepared and understanding how to manage that. And it's different for every farmer, but the key thing is make sure you've got your advisors around you who understand your business, who understand yourselves as people, your family, your strategy. Why are you in this game? Because ultimately, farmers need to be and deserve to be proud of their businesses, because they're making a big difference to the world. And you don't want to risk that by trying to solve every problem yourself. So be proud to actually have good people around you and let them into your business.
We talked on an earlier podcast too around cash flow, when we've been so capital gain hungry for so long, and relying on the valuation of our land as opposed to the black at the bottom of the balance sheet. Do you think that things are starting to change now, especially the way that rural valuation is at the moment with land prices?
I suppose we're starting to see, as we get into the next valuation cycle, we're starting to see the crystallisation of some of those drops in values. And I suppose the reality is, for most farmers, if the bank valued your asset in the peak, you're going to have some sort of equity drop. I think for most farmers, as long as you're viable and as long as you're able to show that you've got control of the cash flow, I don't think that's really a problem. I suspect banks are going to be pretty pragmatic about it, but there will be real consequences down the track. If you do need more finance in 12 or 18 months' time and your balance sheet doesn't look as strong, that is going to take some navigating. And to be honest, most of the bankers I talk to don't know how we're going to deal with this either yet. So it's not an easy situation, but I guess fundamentals apply. Do you have a good business? Are you sound? Do you have the right people around you? And are you demonstrating a track record of making good decisions? And I suppose that's, use your advisors. I suppose it's something we spend a lot of time doing, is making sure that our farmers understand how their business is performing, and that performance is always communicated to their bank and other stakeholders, just to demonstrate quite regularly how well they're doing. As I said, making sure you show how good you are when you don't have the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking earlier with Simon Glennie around this feed pinch, and the fear I have hearing out there is this capacity at the processing plant is just going to create this perfect storm with everything coming in from M. bovis eradication still going on, and drought, etc. And you had suggested to me earlier that the banks were being extremely forthcoming in extending facility at the moment for those types of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one thing I will say for the banks is they act exceptionally well in a crisis, and this is no different. So the COVID-19 impacts on stock being able to go through the works, feed, obviously needing to feed those animals as they remain on farm. I think about the longest turnaround we've had on finance extension for those situations is about 15 minutes. So it's always exceptional dealing with people on the ground, and banks do a really good job of empowering local bankers to make those decisions when it counts. The key thing, though, is it's a bit like the dairy downturn. The same thing happened when cash flows were cut. Banks were really supportive, but you've got to mop it up somewhere. And so I guess that's the thing you've got to be constantly thinking. The crisis, we're in it now. we will come out the other side of it. We will get the support we need to make the short-term decisions, but we really need to be thinking much more further down the track than that in terms of our decision making and how to ensure that when the banks inevitably come looking for that money to come back, we can demonstrate that we've already got that in hand.
For those who are listening and got a burning question for Scott, please put them in the comments below. I can see across both Farmers Weekly website under the Ceres Country page, and of course in the comments wherever you're watching across Facebook and YouTube, because I'll put those to Scott. But Scott, another thing usually here is but what banks aren't listening to my situation, and they feel frustrated because they've felt like they've had a relationship with that bank intergenerational, and when it comes to this point, it's not the same and as rosy as you have played it out for most people. What would your advice be to those farmers to seek advice elsewhere? That's not going to obviously some areas that have got very high interest or high risk.
Yeah, look, you have to take control of it, really. And I think that's the key thing. The banking sector has done a really good job of controlling that for us. The regulatory environment we find ourselves in now just requires, us as farmers and advisors to make sure that we are playing devil's advocate. We are being honest and truthful about the positions we find ourselves in, where the weaknesses are, and how we're going to solve those problems, rather than pretending everything's okay. Bankers by and large, they're all in this industry because they actually want to make a difference and they want to help farmers. Most rural bankers come from farming stock themselves. They're just desperate for us to help them do their job. And the reality is there is just more process involved in that now. So the more we can do to control the information and I guess understand and manage those risks, then the better it is for the banker to help with that relationship. And the better the decision is made by credit. But the reality is that the game has changed, and we cannot rely on the bank to just kind of put all the information together for us and put that forward on our behalf.
What about an accountant doing this for you as opposed to the services that you use? You're a lot more closer to what the banks want potentially than an accountant, or is that unfair?
It's probably unfair. We work with accountants on a daily basis. I think the reality is that we all play an important part in gripping up our client's position. I suppose the difference we bring to the table is, we're a business of bankers. We just don't work for the bank anymore. So we understand the language, we understand the regulators, we understand exactly what the banks are looking for. When we put information to the bank, it's in the format they want to see. It uses the language that they understand. But the reality is it's crap in, crap out. If we don't have, really strong accountants, farm advisors, doing, adequate feed and resource budgeting, if we don't get that accurate information as the input to our process, then we don't have a very good output from our process. So for most of our clients, we do start there and get the entire team around and work out how we can all work together to achieve the farmers' goals.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us as Managing Director of NZAB, Scott Wishart. And I suggest that you go and check NZAB out because not from the fact of any sort of paid promotion here, but for the fact, because there's not, is that Scott is a very reliable source of information. I really enjoy talking to him because, as he said, there are a bunch of bankers that no longer work for the bank, and how better close to the information you can get than that.
This is Ceres Country.